Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those of you who may be joining us from the UK or some other European time zone. My name's Duncan Edwards. I'm the CEO of British American Business, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this session, the latest in our Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability series. And today we're going to be talking about tools that companies are using to deliver on their carbon reduction commitments and to track their progress along that journey. We do have a terrific group of speakers to focus on this topic. But before we get to them, let me thank our series sponsors, who are Debevoise and Plimpton, EY, and United Airlines. And huge thanks also to today's event sponsor, Siemens Financial Services. And we're actually going to start with a short presentation from Siemens Financial Services. And then after that, we're going to go into a broader discussion with a panel. As always, we want to make this as interactive as we can. So please get your questions ready. And you can ask those questions by posting something in the chat, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. I think everyone's a Zoom guru these days, so you don't need me to show you where that is. Please post, particularly during the early part where we've got a presentation, post your question or comments in the chat. And then if you'd like, during the panel discussion, if you'd like to ask your question live, you can do that by using the raise hand function, which again, you can find under the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. So I think those are the house rules. We'll get started. And to kick things off, I'm very pleased to hand over to the President and CEO of Siemens Financial Services and a board member of BAB, Anthony Casciano. I know Anthony has had some problems getting the video to work, but hopefully you can speak. So welcome, Anthony.
Duncan, thank you. Yes, apologies for the video challenges that I'm having. I will share the next few minutes with my colleague, Erica Gupta, who is the head of sustainability for my business and partner on this journey. So I think in the next 10 minutes, we'll take you through maybe a few slides, setting the context for why we built the tool, and then we'll give you a demonstration of the tool. So if that works for you, Erica, if you could put up the slide, we'll navigate that. Perfect. So we're going to talk to you today about the Decarbonization Business Optimizer. It's a tool, and if we could jump to the next page, Erica, it's a tool that is part of what we're doing in building what is a broader ecosystem that involves financial solutions, sustainable products, and other information and resources. And this really lands in the other information and resources. And the goal of the tool is to baseline a company focused on SMEs, baseline their carbon footprint, and optimize the path to decarbonization. It is not a tool that's going to answer all questions, but it helps companies to begin the journey. From that baseline, then we can target products and solutions, decide how it should be financed, use data to continue to build a knowledge base to help to drive content into certain verticals, and hopefully build a marketplace, many of which would involve those on the phone. So colleagues like from Tata and others, because Siemens certainly doesn't have all solutions to all needs. And the key, I think, in creating speed and urgency around this is to match need with availability. Why the supply chain and why SMEs? Supply chain emissions are about 11 times higher than operational emissions. For Siemens itself, it's actually 15 times higher. So, so those that in the U.S., for instance, there's 10,000 plus suppliers. They generate more emission than Siemens itself generates, and the majority of that is coming from small and medium companies. That's what makes up the bulk of our suppliers. 60 to 70% of total industrial pollution comes from SMEs, and Scope 3 emissions account for 80% of many companies' overall climate impact. So if we don't solve the SMEs, we don't solve the decarbonization challenge. The market will drive SMEs in this direction. So if they don't do it naturally, organically, they'll do it because they'll be required to. So for instance, Siemens itself has created a carbon web assessment that asks its suppliers not just what the widget it makes at what price, but also what its emissions are. And they'll use that as one of the deciding criteria. So you may make an equal widget at a reasonable price, but if your carbon footprint is greater than that of your competitor in the RFP, you risk losing the business. And think of that impact, across a multiple of customers. So it's a threat to business viability. Same thing with capital. Investors in these businesses, whether it's on the equity side or the debt side, have screens, ESG screens, of which sustainability is a big part of it. 70% of investors, institutional investors, have an ESG screen. We, as a lender in the B2B space, are measuring our carbon footprint of the portfolios that we finance. So if they don't do it organically, the market will do it for them. So we built the decarb tool, the decarb business optimizer, to do three things: baseline a carbon footprint, create scenarios by which they could decarbonize, because you don't need to decarbonize everything to get an ideal outcome. And so what we try to do is figure out the optimal way where you can create a payback. And that's part of the results that we try to do, using the taxing incentives from the federal government to just the benefits, the cash flows that get created through efficiency, which oftentimes decarbonization delivers, to create a reasonable payback. And we used in this, and maybe Erica, you're better suited to talk about this. And by the way, we've built this tool with Siemens technology, the ones that develop, green energy to digital twins. I pulled Erica over from our technology group to kind of drive this, and she's really the architect of the tool. So Erica, maybe you want to talk about the open source.
Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. And I can also share a few views of the tool quickly. But what we really wanted to do was build a tool that enabled SMEs to start their decarbonization journey without a lot of effort. So without having to go in and dig up their own data, by using these open and trusted data sets from the National Renewable Energy Lab, from EPA and EIA and the DOE. So I think I have about 4 minutes here to give you a quick view into the tools. Let me stop sharing here and start sharing a different page here. So this is really our test environment currently on the tool. But what I wanted to show you is that basically it allows you to very simplistically start by entering just your address, where you're located, and a little bit of information about the size of your site. So for example, that was just our Princeton campus facility. So College Road East, this is Siemens Technology. And you select what type of building it is. We also included many industrial types. And what it'll do is automatically create a load profile that we can then optimize technology adoption against and estimate your baseline carbon footprint. So in this case, it's a medium office. We also built in the ability to measure directly into the tool to get an idea of what your footprint is. That's important for knowing how much space you have on your roof for solar, for example, and scaling the energy use for the site. So this one is 40,000 square feet roughly for the footprint and approximately 4 stories. So I can also look at it through Google Street View to see how many stories it is, but in the interest of time. And what it's doing is automatically pulling data sets for a load profile that's a similar type of building, so the same type of building in the same climate zone as the building you've identified, and scaling it for the size you've entered. And this can all be updated with any real data you have. You can also update the actual electric tariff you're on, so it's connecting to OpenAI utility rate database. And once you've done that, you can then create scenarios against that site to look at things like a particular GHG reduction target or a certain level of resilience if you want to have coverage for grid outages. So for example, this is a custom scenario I ran. I'm going to put a couple additional ones on here. Business as usual. So you can see if I say, I just want you to look at PV and storage without other measures, it actually, for a 50% reduction in CO2, I can actually go further. I can get more reduction if I consider more options besides just battery and PV by including hot or cold storage and other options as well. So it actually improves your payback and minimizes your life cycle costs. And all of this is completely vendor agnostic. So it's pulling from the annual technology baseline that the National Renewable Energy Lab provides for their costs. So it is not Siemens specific. And the goal here is really just to enable that first step. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Anthony to add any additional comments.
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Erica. So a couple of things. Again, the data that we're using is open source data from independent sites like NREL and others, right? So it's not ours. It's the data that exists elsewhere. We've built a patent pending algorithm around it to kind of derive these outputs. And it's not going to answer whether you need to replace, an HVAC system or whatever, but it at least is going to tell you where your carbon footprint is, or at least a view of what it is and how you can optimize it, right? And so it begins the journey, and then you need others to help continue the journey. The other thing I would say is, while we've invested a lot of money in this, we are looking to give this away for free, because we don't want to create winners and losers out of this outcome. We want everyone to have the chance to participate, and we want this to be as ubiquitous as possible. And so the only way to do that, to make it not a Siemens advantage, is to give everyone the opportunity. And then the marketplace, again, at the end of it, becomes, who are those that can bring the best value? In some instances, it's a local provider, right? It's going to be someone who's can repair or upgrade HVAC. It's not going to be what Siemens does. Siemens only has solutions for a percentage of where the need is. But I think collectively, with some of those on the phone and others in the market, we can help them stay competitive in the future. And that's really our goal. The next step for us in terms of tool development is a resiliency tool, which will help companies assess the resiliency in weather-driven events. And we're seeing them every day, whether it's droughts or wind or storm, things that can shut a business down. Are they well prepared? Do they have the right windows or other to be able to deliver and maintain continuity of their business? So with that, that's really the overview, I think, and we're happy. We have a QR code. We're allowing people to sign up for demos and to start to do it. We were at Climate Week with this, and we had thousands of companies look to sign up. Happy to have you as well, and to speak offline if you want more information on it. Thanks, Duncan.
Thank you, Anthony and Erica. Thank you very much. And it's always helpful to actually see the demo as well as the slides. It really does bring things to life. And I have about 100 questions on that, but I'll let the panel pick it up. And please, if you do have questions, just put them in the chat or raise your hand. But a great introduction to the discussion. And of course, this is a huge challenge for SMEs, SMBs, who are increasingly being asked, not only because they want to do the right thing, but because they're being asked in RFQs and so on to identify their current carbon footprint and their plans to reduce it. And for big companies with resources who can hire people to help them or manage it internally, it's much easier. Small companies, really tough. So this tool seems like a great additional to the arsenal that is available to people. And with that, look, I'm really happy now to pass on to Richard Marsden. Richard's a partner at the US-UK management consulting business, the Barclay Partnership. I never know. Are you the Berkeley Partnership or the Barclay Partnership? Is that English or American English? So
I think that depends on where you're located, Duncan. But originally Barclay, but we roll with both these days.
Of course. Over to you.
Thanks very much, and good morning or good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So I'd just like to start by reminding you of who's on our panel today and who we've got. They'll each probably say a little bit about themselves and their roles when they come in to answer questions. But we've got Anthony, who you've just heard from, President and CEO, Siemens Financial Services. We also welcome Hannah Brady, Environmental Sustainability Manager at United Airlines. And we also have Navin Rohinia, who's partner at Tata Consultancy Services. And yes, thank you, Duncan. Myself, Richard Marsden, a partner at the management consultancy, the Barclay Partnership, where my recent experience has involved setting up strategy and delivery plans for the decarbonisation of a UK-based bus and rail organisation, amongst other things. I'm just going to say a couple of quick opening remarks, and then what I'll do is I'll fire a question into each of our panelists, get them talking, and hopefully the chat and the hands will start to get raised as we get into it. So firstly, thanks again to Erica for a great demonstration of the Decarbonisation Business Optimizer and the value it can bring organisations. I would just say it sounds obvious, but gathering evidence and understanding your data was a really important first step for us at Barclay, because that did exactly what Erica suggested. It allows us to go on and examine the priority areas where we know we can start to action things very quickly. And I'm proud to say we are now a certified carbon neutral company. And a few remarks as the questions rolled in. I mean, it's clearer now to us than ever. Businesses have to act decisively to minimise their climate impact, harness opportunities of operating sustainably. All of us on this call can probably agree that there's an urgent and strategic imperative for us as leaders to take positive action in this area and minimise climate change. And therefore, to maximise financial benefits and environmental impact, businesses have to move from sort of a compliance mindset to one where they put sustainability at the core of their organisations. And that in turn, I'm sure, requires us to make some very important strategic choices. And that's going to impact our cultures, our supply chains, how we innovate, our technology, our operating models. That all in turn requires quite a significant transformation. It requires the right knowledge, the right value chain insight, and the right transformation to succeed. And I think that's where all of our panel experts are going to come into their own over the course of the next half an hour or so. So I'm going to invite Navin to speak first. Navin, how do you and your team look at carbon emissions at TCS and help people with the myriad of buzzwords that are out there? There are so many of them. How do you help people demystify all of the language when you're thinking of using a tool like the one we've just seen? And how do you get to a common language with your clients and in your own organization?
So look, a really good question, and thank you so much for British American Business for having us on today as well. A great panel and lovely to meet you all. Look, carbon emissions, it's such a simplified word that everybody thinks that pluck a number out of the sky and it will just literally the sky, right? And it was on airplane, right? But you need to have a strategy, and you need to understand, where does emission sit in the whole of the sustainability framework. Now, we can see that corporates have gone out and basically talked a lot about CSO, sustainability. How do you connect the different parts of this? Understand that one. What do you think?
Sorry, Navin, sorry to interrupt. Can you just get either your mic is coming in and out a little bit. I don't know whether you've got a lapel mic or another mic or just.
I think there's some feedback coming from somebody else.
Okay, if you just speak into the mic, that's a little better.
Okay, can you all hear me okay now? Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better now. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So sorry, that feedback coming back again. I don't know who that is.
I think if Anthony can mute himself just while he's not speaking, that might help. Thanks, Anthony.
That is so much more better now. Everyone hear me okay? 100%? Perfect. So the CSO, right, the Chief Sustainability Officer, needs to understand, how do you connect to carbon emissions? Well, you have an ESG framework at the top level. What's the problem with the ESG framework, right? You've got the proposal from the US SECC, right? We've got this International Sustainability Standards Board, which is endorsed by FSB and IOSCO, which just measures financial materiality. We have the Europeans, which are looking at ESRS, European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are measuring double materiality. So not just carbon emission reporting, but the impact of carbon emissions on society as well. And then on top of it, we have other frameworks such as the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI. We have the SASB, Sustainability Accountability Standards Board, if I got that right. We've got the TCFD, which is your disclosure on climate risk. All of that has to go into an ESG framework. And by the way, some of those frameworks I mentioned are being amalgamated into the ISSB under the International Financial Reporting Standards. Now you tell me, where are you going to get a carbon emission number from when you've got all of these different frameworks around the world? If you're a large corporate with multi-jurisdictions, with legal entities set up in the US, in the UK, in Europe, in Asia, etc., you're going to be privy to different ESG frameworks, which means collecting different pieces of data using different types of methodologies as well, right? And look, Richard, I could go on. Climate risk has its own set of rules. Carbon markets has its own set of rules as well. Net zero has its own set of rules as well, right? But ESG is just one example. But we need to bring that all together, Richard, to just understand that number of carbon emissions. And that's what we help our clients with, demystifying the myths, may I say, yeah. Back to yourself.
It's certainly a confusing landscape of regulation and very fast moving at the moment. Even in a regulatory world, it's fast moving. Can I bring Hannah into the conversation? Welcome, Hannah. From your experiences at United, how can measuring and reducing carbon emissions contribute both to the environmental responsibility, but also to United's business success? Perhaps you could share some benefits with everybody this afternoon of the work that United are doing in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, thank you for being here. Very excited to dive into this conversation and this discussion. It's a very interesting topic. I agree that it's complex and confusing, and there's a lot of acronyms as well. So for United, we are committed to tackling our in-sector emissions. We know we're a hard to abate sector, and our carbon footprint looks a little different from a lot of these SMEs that we've been discussing. Our carbon footprint is from the combustion of jet fuel. It's more than 2/3 of our carbon footprint. Our supply chain doesn't contribute as much to our carbon footprint as a typical organization. So yes, we've all heard it. You can't manage what you don't measure. So for us, it's about measuring our jet fuel consumption and the combustion of that jet fuel generating our carbon footprint. So there's some easy wins in terms of increasing our fuel efficiency. Reducing our carbon footprint through increased fuel efficiency also improves operational costs. So that's one aspect of our decarbonization roadmap that is really obvious. Some other benefits from the business perspective associated with reducing our carbon footprint. We are really focused on increasing the use of sustainable aviation fuel and increasing scaling the sustainable aviation fuel market. So SAF is going to be the most important way that we reduce our carbon footprint. So the sustainable aviation fuel, it is made from renewable materials instead of fossil, and it can reduce our carbon emissions from combustion of jet fuel up to 80%. So that is going to be the most critical component of our decarbonization roadmap. We have a goal to be net zero by 2050 without the use of carbon offsets. That will rely on the use of sustainable aviation fuel. So we have a few programs in place that are focused on scaling adoption of SAF as well as increasing SAF technology. Our Eco Skies Alliance program is one that is working with corporate customers to help fund that green premium for sustainable aviation fuel today. It costs 2 to 4 times more than fossil jet fuel. And so working with our corporate customers through the Eco Skies Alliance program, we can reduce that green premium while strengthening our relationships with our corporate customers who are, on the same journey that we all are to decarbonize their footprints and looking for ways that they can reduce the emissions associated with their business travel. So the Eco Skies Alliance program is a great win-win for them and for us to be able to start reducing our carbon footprint today through the use of sustainable aviation fuel.
That's great, Hannah. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for that insight. And Anthony, if you're, appreciate we're having a couple of issues with your sound, but if you are able to join us, would you mind just recapping for us why a financial services organization is focused on this topic of decarbonisation and sustainability in general? I think people would be interested to hear about the benefits that that financial services organizations are able to offer to people thinking about sustainability at the moment. And I wonder if you could comment on that for us, please.
Yeah, Richard, hopefully you can hear me. And I was asked this question today. I'm in Austin and speaking to a group, and they asked that same question. And I answered it this way. Historically, when we looked at making an investment in a company, we had to make 2 decisions. Do we believe in the strategy? Can the company win in what it does, right? Can they generate the revenue and the profitability that they say they can? And then 2, how do we evaluate their ability to execute the strategy? So can they win and is the strategy right, and can they execute? And so historically, you would look at different dimensions that have now changed. Sustainability is one of those dimensions that will define in our minds winners and losers. So for instance, just personalizing it for Siemens, if we were financing a company, a small, medium company in Siemens supply chain, and they lost Siemens as a revenue source because they didn't decarbonize, because their emissions were greater than what Siemens was willing to accept, they lose revenue and they risk the likelihood of failure, right? So, and I think our goal is, rather than creating winners and losers inside the supply chain, let's create a path where anyone can be that winner. Before, it used to be, there were climate deniers or climate those that accept it. Now it doesn't really matter. If your customer tells you you need to change, you need to change. And so our goal is to help that. And by the way, I talk about SMEs because they're the ones where I think the ground's more fertile in terms of need to understand the issue. But we had a Climate Week, 2 Fortune 50 companies that asked, could they use the tool inside their footprint of manufacturers? so that they could get a handle, or could they use it in their supply chain themselves? So all it is a view of a site, a factory, or a commercial building, whatever it is, to begin that process. So that's why, and that's why not looking to really to make money off of it. I think the opportunity becomes in seeing these companies stay successful, and from a risk perspective, making sure they're viable enough to repay, in my case, a loan, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the goal.
Great. No, thank you for that comment, Anthony. Thank you very much. And Erica, if we've still got you on the call at the moment, there is a question in the chat which just needs picking up, which is around how people are thinking about this if they've got a fully remote or working from home type workforce, and how organizations or SMEs in particular might start to think about sustainability from that point of view. Could you just offer us a comment on that as well, please?
So currently, the tooling that we've developed would not cover that specific scenario. There are some other tools out there, though, that help you kind of calculate those Scope 3 emissions or other kind of more complex emissions. Right now, we're really focused on Scope 1 and 2, where we can have the most impact and it's the most measurable.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to people, if you do want to ask a question, please do just raise your hand or pop something into the chat, and then we'll be able to come to you and make sure we do answer the questions as they are coming in. Hannah, can I just come back to you then at United? I'm curious to know what role you've got fostering a culture change around sustainable practices. You know, how are you going to achieve long-term success? You've got evolving expectations of stakeholders, of customers. How do you go about promoting a culture around sustainability at United?
Yeah, so the expectations of our stakeholders, they are evolving constantly with, we're a publicly traded company. Our investors are increasingly asking for more numbers, for more data, and for more information about how we're going to achieve our climate goals. So like I said, we've set a goal to be 100% green by 2050 or net zero by 2050 without the use of carbon offsets. And so we recently released this year our decarbonization roadmap to 2050, which really outlines that pathway to net zero. So it dives into those numbers and answers those questions that we are seeing increasingly from investors. And of course, that required collaboration across our organization, because it's going to impact every department within the organization. So creating that atmosphere of creating that culture of sustainability within the organization, I would say it starts with leadership from the top. We have such a great advocate in our climate advocate in Scott Kirby as our CEO, and with our communications team creating these really amazing educational campaigns with Oscar the Grouch as our chief trash officer to educate both our employees and the public about what sustainable aviation fuel is, how it contributes to our strategy, how it will allow us to achieve net zero in 2050. So being able to have that educational campaign paired with our really amazing leadership has created this culture of sustainability that allows us to create this decarbonization roadmap to 2050, to create buy-in across the company, across so many different departments, to understand what their role is, whether it's providing data or whether it is implementing those changes that will increase fuel efficiency, or whether their role is related to scaling SAF usage through our fuel organization. So that's how we're creating that culture across United.
That's good to hear. Thank you for the answer. And it reminds me of the elements of the strategy. You know, when I was looking at this on behalf of bus and rail, you know, you start thinking about what comprises a coherent strategy and how you take it forward, from fuel strategies, asset and fleets, through considerations around your properties, how you roll out and cascade the thinking across the whole company. You need commercial, financial strategies. Your operating models are likely to change. Your change management around the whole thing needs really carefully thinking through. So you get into your people and maybe even then you start thinking about other emissions. So the strategies are wide and complex and varying, and encompass, as you'd expect, all elements of organizations and business. And Nav, I think that brings me to another point that we've talked about previously, which is that bucket of other emissions. And as I understand it, the tool's looking at scope 1 and scope 2, but we've got these things called scope 3, which are very wide and varied and complex. How do TCS think about this internally and when talking to clients, and how do you guys start to address the topic of scope 3 with people?
Yeah, definitely. So like, we need to keep it simple, right? Scope 3 is essentially scope 1 and 2 of another client, right? You know, one of the things we always say is, if you're in a supply chain, you're a big corporate and you've got a supply chain, let's not ram it down their throat to go and get the scope 3. Let's work with the suppliers and the supply chain, including mom and pop businesses as well, which are the bread and butter of the British and the American economy as well, to make sure that they can get their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions correct. Once you've done that, then start looking at scope 3. Once you want to look at scope 3, well, this is where you need to think about data quality. Now, data quality is not going to be perfect. You can't expect a SME business or a mom and pop business to go and give you their scope 1 and scope 2 carbon emissions not just yet. So how do you do and bring in methodologies like estimation, regression, interpolation? And how do you say it's a finger in the air number, or I'm proxying to, say, another client or a similar client, or I'm downscaling from a slightly bigger company that has disclosed its scope 3 emissions? And once you get a whole bunch of scope 3 numbers, how do you look forward and how do you look backward as well? We just don't want to look at the scope 3 number for our client for the end of this year, because at the end of the day, a company, from sustainability perspective, companies need to look investable. If they want to look investable, they need to have forward-looking and backward-looking. And how do you do that? That's where concept of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing comes in. Why? Because if you're going to try and estimate those scope 3 emissions, i.e. scope 1 and scope 2 of the client downstream, well, you're going to be getting that data from very different sources. You're going to get that from PDF documents, from websites, some of these various ESG disclosures. And don't forget the US S&K regulations that we have on the other side of the pond, where carbon emissions are disclosed as well. Again, a lovely little PDF which gives you a history of carbon emissions. Hope that's helpful, Richard.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Duncan, you've raised your hand. I'd like to bring you in.
Yeah, thanks. Great discussion. Thank you all very much. And I actually put this question in the chat, but I'm just curious about where things stand for SMEs, you know, including mum and pop business up to the sort of the larger SMEs in terms of kind of real world implications at the moment. So are we seeing small and medium-sized companies not getting access to finance, or not getting, or being removed from supply chains if they're not able to articulate their current carbon footprint and a pathway to reduction, or is this coming down the track? I mean, so I'm just I can understand why people will want to start measuring this and finding tools to do so, but I'm just trying to get a sense of what the implications are if they don't. So what are the real world implications currently?
Anthony,
You
I think
are
we should
seeing
probably...
that. Oh, sorry, go on, Richard.
Well, I was gonna ask Anthony to come in on it, but go on.
Sure,
I've
sure.
seen as you've got the microphone. Why don't you go first, and then Anthony perhaps to come in after you?
Yes, just very, very briefly. I think if you give financiers a mandate to count every single financed emission, there's a methodology called PCAF. We won't go into that today. But if you're asking to disclose your emissions at the top level, including using this ESG international framework called the ISSB, well, financiers are going to be worried about their retail bank giving loans and how do they calculate the carbon intensity and carbon emissions of the loan. And there are small businesses which are saying, hey, I just went out to go and get a loan, and they've asked me 100 million questions about ESG, right? You know, all I want is just a simple, plain vanilla loan. Thank you very much, right? You know, so I think sizing and shaping is very important. Yes, put the large corporates on the cosh, but smaller businesses, you know, they run this economy.
Yeah, maybe I've got a little bit of a different perspective. I can tell you I've seen green bonds, particularly more in Europe than we've seen in the US, but also in the US, sustainability-linked loans come to bear, not nearly as large number as one would have expected, but I think you are seeing capital move, and you're seeing in certain sectors the cost of capital going up. So there's a lot of private debt. There's also other sources of capital in out of favor industries, and in those cases it's the cost of capital. But what I would tell you is inside the supply chain, we've seen many of our customers receive RFPs with a calculation for their carbon footprint. This whole exercise for the tool started with one of our customers receiving it and asking us to help them answer the question. How do I put the data in here? And that was with a Fortune 10 company. So they're starting to find themselves into RFPs. We've seen certain companies that we work with, some of those that we don't even finance, but we have relationships with in different contexts, where they've been asked to provide the equipment that they manufacture all as E, i.e., a material handling equipment to all be delivered E, right? And so now they're looking at, well, how do I do that? How do I source batteries? Do I have to manufacture batteries, right? So I think there's patience inside the supply chain, but I think you've begun to see the process. There has to be time for transition. Again, we just rolled out, when I say we, the collective we, the Siemens we, rolled out just during Climate Week, the carbon web assessment. So we haven't seen a consequence to the measures, but they're asking for the measures. So I don't know yet. But what we do know is the companies that we deal with are now more regularly being asked to create some baseline of emission.
I wonder if, Hannah, is United asking your SME suppliers to provide evidence of their carbon footprint, or are you just focusing on the big issue, which is fuel?
Right now, we're just focused on the big issue. Since fuel is the majority of our carbon footprint, we have not started to tackle supply chain reduction yet, though we are in the same process as everyone else, trying to tackle measurement of that footprint. And data integrity, good quality data is so important. And it's, along with everyone else, we're struggling with the same concerns.
So someone's just Jonathan, you've just put a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to ask it or whether you want me to do it on your behalf, if you're come off mute. But I think it's a good question.
Okay, so I'm just really asking, so at the moment, the only requirement is to baseline, and there's no particular need to do anything more than that at this point for normal businesses. I'm not talking about massive multinationals.
So I think, yeah, maybe I'll take a shot at this. So I think over time, the consequence will be what we've said earlier is losing potential revenue. So I think, yes, it's getting in the game, it's baselining, but there will be decisions made between supplier one and supplier two for the same widget, all things being equal based on carbon footprint. I've not seen one of our customers lose revenue, but I can tell you that based on the way the questions are positioned, the expectation is that will happen over time. I don't have a window for it yet, though, because we haven't seen it, and Siemens hasn't. From what we're doing, we haven't, or at least I've not heard them creating the consequence.
Okay, so currently, baselining is the only requirement.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks.
It's an interesting one, isn't it, though? Because I think depending on your company's strategy, and again, it'd be interesting to hear from Tata and United on this, but depending on what your company's strategy is and how you are placing sustainability in your sort of overall organizational strategy, there are, as well as your regulatory compliance and your baselining and your understanding, there are just a whole range of opportunities that the strategy can unlock around your operating efficiency and your cost base, for example. Alignment around asset types is a great way of that changing over time as people electrify fleets or whatever it might be. We've heard about access to finance, but increasingly having a sustainability at the heart of your organization's strategy is going to give you access to talent, consumer loyalty, brand reputation, your position in the marketplace against your peers, your ability to drive innovation. So I think as we see companies embrace perhaps beyond what the regulations are asking for them, there is the opportunity through having some well thought through strategies here to do far more as a business than perhaps we're seeing if we just take a baselining or a purely data driven approach to understanding our carbon footprint. Duncan, you've asked another question in the chat. Shall I come back to you? Because again, I think it's a really good question here around ESG.
Well, I'll ask it. It's just a bee that I have in my bonnet, which is this kind of conflation that we've got into of three completely different concepts of environmental, so carbon emissions, societal impact, and governance. And no one ever really talks about governance. And yet, you know, allocators of capital talk about ESG as if they're sort of, you know, kind of broadly similar concepts, and they're just completely not. And yeah, at least environmental issues, you know, so carbon emission, either net or absolute, and I'm more about the absolute than the net, to be honest, is at least theoretically measurable. I just wonder whether there's you know, are we too kind of unquestionably locked into this shorthand of ESG, and wouldn't we be better served by just focusing on E as a separate kind of metric? Rant over.
That's what the issue is. That's what the issue is, Duncan. So happy to chime in there. We moved too fast with ESG. We came out of the pandemic, post-pandemic, thinking a lot about workers' rights. We thought a lot about mental health. We thought a lot about how do we treat our customers, especially in the pandemic. Yes, all very important. But we then thought, okay, yippee, we need to measure that, right? And we need to measure that ASAP. And unfortunately, the industry, and I'm not saying that, but we've done the wrong thing. We've just run too fast. And the issue is that in a environment where we have the Middle East outbreak, Russia, Ukraine continuing, potential conflict with China, Taiwan, high rates, high inflation. Are we in recession? Are we not in recession? You know, has rates peaked in the US and the UK? That's the concern at the moment to corporates, refinancing costs, right? So what we've observed is ESG slightly slipping down the agenda. There will be a revival of ESG when we see the economy rebound again. But I think we need to learn that we moved too fast, right? Let's get the data right first. Let's get environmental metrics correct first. Let's figure out how do we calculate carbon emissions internationally, and every single country should have the same calculation for carbon emissions. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and if you've deliberately excluded fossil fuels from your portfolio, you've lost money. I mean, if your investment strategy is to, maximize your retirement benefits, then that's been it's been a poor strategy recently.
Well, we're back to the importance of setting a really clear strategy out, aren't we? And making sure you're thinking through all of these important questions as we go through it, Duncan, from the way that's saying. Rachel, you've just popped a question into the chat. I don't know if you want to come on and just and direct that at who you think is for you on the panel.
And I apologize. So my question was, what's the deadline? So you've talked about whether or not we need to step back and make sure we get the timelines right about this. But what is the deadline? What is the deadline to get your metrics correct so we can actually do and move forward?
That's a very good question, because from a regulatory point of view, it depends which particular set of acronyms you're following and which dates they're specifying. The European ones are generally slightly ahead with deadlines set for, depending on size of firm and revenue, for 24 and then 25. But of course, I think as Navin was talking about earlier, that very much depends which set of regulations we're following in which country and what your requirements are.
And by the way, the UK is still debating when ISSB is going to go live. So ISSB looks like preference, but we still don't have a date when that's going to happen, right? And that's very confusing, especially for British businesses, because they might be operating in Europe and they're privy to the ESRS, European ESG standards. So what do you go and then do? Do you go and copy over the European standards to fill in the gap for the British standards, right? So from next year, European countries are domiciled in Europe, or even third party, they have to start reporting from next year, 250 employees and above. Simple as that, right? Well, go Europeans, right? The UK and the US are still lagging, right? It would be great for the SEC and Fed, BOE, PRA, FCA to get together and give us some clarity, especially if you're a business operating in these 3 different jurisdictions.
And governments and companies are making their commitments on very large commitments on when they plan to be net zero, carbon neutral, or green businesses. Hannah, if I come to you, I mean, United, I think I'm right in saying 100% green by 2050. Can you just say a little bit about the timelines you guys are working to and what that pledge really means in reality?
Yeah, so 100% green by 2050 is our net zero by 2050 pledge, and it's to be net zero by 2050 without the use of traditional carbon offsets. We have a recently validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative interim goal for 2035. That's to reduce our carbon intensity of our flying by 50%. So right now we're working towards 2035, and that's going to, again, require scaling of sustainable aviation fuel. So we're making investments now today because we recognize that the industry is so nascent and so small. We use sustainable aviation fuel for 0.1% of our flying last year. So we'll need to scale that greatly to hit those 2035 goals. So we're looking today at what investments do we need to make in order to scale that industry to be able to hit that interim target. So we've launched this year our Sustainable Flight Fund, which is a fund with 13 other corporate partners. It's a $200 million fund that is investing in sustainable aviation fuel technology and companies that are working within that space today, so that we can scale such a small industry today to be able to start meeting our goals in the 2030 timeframe.
And we talked earlier about ESG and the G of governance. Just to give the people on the call a flavour, how is the governance working for you, and is this all the way to the top? I mean, how how and where is the governance working around sustainability within United?
Yeah, so governance is, of course, really important, but not often talked about. It is, we are working within our sustainability team, which covers ESG. I sit within our decarbonization, so the E of the ESG. So it's tough to be able to answer to all of those different things when they are completely different knowledge sets, I would say. So we're working hand in hand with different partners across the organization to make sure that the governance is in place there. And it's not something that we're ignoring or waiting till later. It's important to do it at the same time as the environmental goals. So we're making sure that we're working with our internal audit teams regularly and setting in place all of the structures that are necessary to make sure that the claims that we're saying, all of this amazing work that we're doing on the environmental side is, we're not going to, obviously greenwashing lawsuits are huge right now. And so we don't want to, we're working so hard to make these investments to scale sustainable aviation fuel and making sure that we have the governance in place to back that up.
Thank you very much. Thank you. One eye on time, Duncan. I think we probably are at a point where, from a panel discussion point of view, we should draw that to a close. So thank you to Anthony and to Hannah and to Navin for your insights and for your comments. We've heard a lot about the importance of ESG. We've heard a lot about evidence, getting your data right, mechanisms for thinking that through, the importance of timelines, the importance of good strategy and the components of that and how it all comes together. And I'm sure all of us on the panel would welcome some email traffic or further questions if people wish to follow up with us and get our insights and our help and support on their thinking as they take this important topic forward. But Duncan, I think that draws us to a close, and back to you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Richard, and thanks, of course, to the panel and to everyone who's spoken today, and also to you, Richard, for moderating the conversation so well. It's really been a fascinating hour. I would just add a shout out to Scott Kirby of United. We've done a couple of kind of in-depth conversations with Scott, which are probably available on our website or our YouTube panel if you want to watch them. And he's been super interesting about his approach to this subject, and the complete unwillingness to go down the kind of fake offsetting kind of route. It's really about absolute reduction and using SAF and carbon capture and storage technologies that might be developed in the future. It's really kind of interesting to hear someone running such a giant organization with one of the biggest problems, one of the biggest challenges. So anyway, this is a subject that we're going to return to continuously. It matters for big corporations. It matters for people pitching for business and filling in RFPs. And it matters for small businesses, as we've heard today, who want to preserve their place in the supply chain and don't have the resources that big companies have to do this. So it looks like a really helpful innovation from Siemens Financial Services. So thanks all very much, and look out for the next thing from BAB, because we'll be back. Thank you.